Okay, hello everyone. This class is on the first house. So we're just going to take a minute and drop into the space of learning. We're going to be learning what the first house corresponds to. And one of the keywords that I've used for the first house, which is just an essential description, is will. Which means before we even begin to speak about the first house, we want to understand what's the will. What is will? This is, to me, a very important thing to analyze, a very important thing to speak about. Because we often take for granted in astrology the different characteristics that are applied to the various houses without really thinking about what are these characteristics, like from the point of view of consciousness, from the point of view of truth. What is will? What is the archetype of will? And I think what's confusing about the idea of will, we tend to think of it in terms of, what do I want? What do you want? What do I want? What's my will? That's where we have the first house associations with, this is desire. It's what we're consciously moving toward. It's what we want. But it really brings up the question, what's the purpose of will? What's the point of will? What's its function? Why does it even exist? And I want to point us just to a more fundamental, and this is more of a Piscean way of thinking of reality, which is from the point of view of the truth, from the point of view of, I'm just going to, Sue, you might want to mute yourself. From the point of view of absolute reality, there couldn't be wills, right? Like, life can't be comprised of everyone just does what they want and has their own will and is seeking to fulfill their own desires. From the point of view of absolute truth, we're not looking at something that's divided. We're looking at something that's essentially true. Right? That's the flow of the Tao, the flow of life. We can say the will of God or the will of oneness is itself. The deeper truth that we're all learning on this soul journey is there's a unifying truth that is of the essence of everything, that's guiding and moving all facets of our soul journey back home to itself, right? Like, the goal, that which we're realizing, isn't like, I'm here to realize this and you're here to realize that. There might be different expressions and manifestations of our own realization, but at the core, it's a unification, right? Like, there's an underlying principle of unification that's inherent to every being. That's a core principle for me on my own journey, and my own faith and my own trust. And that's what we can say is really essential to the Pisces archetype, the 12th house Pisces Neptune archetype. And so when we begin to look into the first house and we think about the idea of will, we need to understand that from the point of view of what's true. So the question that I'll pose is, what's the function, what's the purpose of individual will from the point of view of the soul's ongoing evolutionary journey? And is it really true that we can all desire what it is that we want? That we have this total free reign, open field to will ourselves forward in life, to do what we want, to seek what we want, to desire anything at all? What's it going towards? What's it do? What's its purpose? So this is where the first house is a very interesting archetype, because planets that are operating in the first house, on the one hand, requires a lot of freedom for the soul to act upon their own desires, to act upon their own instinctual sense of becoming. I'm moving somewhere in life. And from that point of view, what's carried in any kind of first house expression is some level of anxiety, because there's a sense of the whole field seems to be open to us, like this whole, the playing field of life. And I'm here to make choices and make decisions and decide, where am I going to go? And the decisions that we make naturally will create certain consequences, which will then open the door to a new set of life experiences from which we'll make new choices. And we keep on making those choices, and there's an inherent anxiety in that, because it really can feel like it's just me in the world. And inherent within the first house experience can actually be a deep sense of aloneness, an anxiety rooted in this deep feeling of aloneness and a loss of perspective. Because how do I know what choice to make? on one level, we can say, well, you make choices according to what it is that you're wanting. But that's the point. Like, what are we wanting? How do we even decide what we're wanting? This is why I start off this talk with this broader perspective on we need to understand will from a higher spiritual point of view. Because without an underlying orientation, understanding to something beyond our own making, something beyond what we're deciding to do, we're just in this perpetual ongoing almost fight with reality. Like, I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to make it, I'm going to go forward and do this thing and pursue this desire. It's like the entrepreneur that's always doing the next thing, always starting, always initiating, or the person who's working out, who's always getting that adrenaline rush and always getting bigger, always getting stronger, always trying to push the next boundary, overcome the next obstacle. Or a person who plays sports and is trying to beat their last goal, trying to go faster, quicker, stronger. We can find ourselves just developing our will and feeling like we're moving forward, but then it's like, what's the point? What are we actually doing? Eventually what happens, we wear out the body, we die, right? Like there's a underlying sense of, okay, that's great, you beat your record, you went really fast, you got what you wanted, you were able to achieve. And what's the whole dynamic within the first house is the need to feel that we can be alive, the need to know that we can make life happen, the need to feel that we can make choices, that we can orient our attention towards that which we feel or believe to be necessary for us being alive, existing. So Edgar, we live our life asserting our own freedom, but we need to understand what this is for. So I've often spoken about Mars, and I extend this to the first house Aries archetype as a self-cleaning oven. There is this understanding that all will, all desire, and thus all actions that we take in life, that we feel we need to act upon, doesn't serve any purpose within its own self, meaning its goal isn't itself. Rather, the goal is the playing it out and the exhausting of it. And we learn more about ourselves through that. Simple as that. Like we become more aware of who we are and inherent capacities within us, but we don't hold on to it. We don't set up shop, ideally, ultimately, for too long in any kind of identity construct that says, okay, I'm a strong warrior, I'm able to achieve what I want, I'm able to actualize my desires. We don't say that the goal itself is this freedom to act. The goal itself isn't this thing that we're trying to do. The goal is just a process. And there's an unraveling that's happening in that process. And the fact that there's an unraveling says that there is something fundamentally true about life, about who we are, that's being realized through the vehicle of our own freedom to make choices, to initiate life experience. And so one of the challenges that manifests within any kind of first house expression would be that sense of, I'm just needing that freedom to act and to do. And there becomes a total loss of perspective in that process, because we don't really allow ourselves to harvest a deeper wisdom and a greater intelligence for our own soul journey. And whatever evolutionary stage we're in, there needs to be a growing intelligence, a deeper thoughtfulness regarding what's the point of all of this? Why am I doing this? Otherwise, the challenge here can be this need to assert one's freedom at all costs, which then means we end up living life in a way that is somewhat argumentative or defensive, seeing confrontation. And we're going to manifest the perception of confrontation. We're actually going to manifest experiences and perceptions of reality, where we will then need to find ways to overcome the obstacles that we perceive. It's a part of the journey of the first house. It's like, I need to create obstacles so I can experience what it's like to overcome them, so that I can actually awaken to and claim more agency of choice. So I can connect with this facet of my own being that has the ability to choose and make decisions. So just as much as that can become an endless struggle, endlessly living in this place of confrontation, where we're overcoming obstacles. It makes me think of this teaching I was listening to today from Adyashanti. Beautiful teaching. He was saying something to the likes of, overcoming obstacles isn't really overcoming obstacles, it's overcoming the perception of obstacles, right? We move through these periods in our life. The obstacles themselves weren't actual obstacles. That's the whole reality of it, right? That brings us back to the Piscean reality, the 12th house. There isn't anything wrong here. There has never been something that's taken us away from the oneness. It's just been the actions that we've believed ourselves necessary to take, that are necessary to take. The life experience we felt to be necessary to have to work through what? Our own mind. I mean, that's like the deeper truth of all of this stuff. We can't bypass that and say, okay, I'm not going to act anymore. I'm not going to do. Because a part of the acting journey, a part of the living, having life experience, overcoming obstacles, is to realize the nature of our own mind. So he gave the example of a bullfighter and a bull. Now, and the bullfighter's waving the red flag, and the bull says, "Oh, here's a red flag. I'm going to go." Right? What happens? You move the flag away. The bull is still in the same place, the same arena. You haven't moved anywhere. In a sense, that's a part of what we're all doing here. There is this singularity of truth and presence here now, what we are, what is true, that doesn't change. It's not something we're moving towards or away from, but it is something we are realizing. The truth of the realization of it is what's essential. Not that it's something we're finding outside of where we are, right? It's not that it's going to come in some future moment, right? It's all about us. The spiritual journey is 100% about our own realization of what already is true, right? So then we bring it back to this need for freedom, this need to act, this need to make decisions. The deeper understanding of that is for the unraveling of our own realization, which means everything we're trying to become, every need that we have to act upon our own desires, it's not right or wrong. And in fact, we have to be really, it's taking full responsibility for our soul journey is about understanding what is the path we simply need to walk, not repressing it. Because if we don't allow ourselves to walk that path, we won't allow ourselves to find out what's on the other end of that, to have those realizations. But at the same time, the wisdom to say, okay, that's just a red flag. I don't have to plow through it. It's not going to get me anywhere. To have the wisdom to say, I don't have to fight this battle. I don't have to defend my freedom here. And that's the growth that happens within all first house expressions, where there's that need to have freedom to act, to initiate whatever life experiences, to move forward. And forward means in time, in space, towards what is not now, which implies separation, right? Like to create such experiences so that we can learn more about who we essentially are and then let go of those needs, let go of those desires. It's quick, it's fast burning, it's a self-cleaning oven. To allow ourselves the experiences and also to know when it's like, okay, I don't have to react here. And the gauge for how much action is needed, how much reaction is needed, how much new experience, how much we have to disrupt the balance and the status quo and the stability of the present moment into something new. The gauge for that isn't objective by any means. It's really inside of ourselves, and we have to each determine and know for ourselves what's needed along the soul journey. If we're going to repress that, we're not going to evolve, we're not going to learn. So we think about what's will. Like, what's will all about? It must not have any meaning unto itself, right? And the deeper truth is there's God's will. There's the will of love. There's the will of the intelligence of life that's always wanting to remember and return to itself. And thus we can say within the first house, ultimately, our personal actions and choices are fundamentally at the core reflective of how we are each choosing to orient our attention towards whatever is necessary for our own return. And our choices and actions or lack thereof can be oriented towards that or in resistance to that fundament. And that's, of course, the relationship between the first house Mars Aries archetype and the Pluto Scorpio 8th house archetype. Because the Scorpio 8th house archetype fundamentally says there are only two choices. Everything at the core boils down to, on the level of free will, am I choosing to perceive my reality and thus choose from the stance of disempowerment? And thus I'm trying to get something to resist my own evolutionary growth. I'm trying to persist in my own separation. Or am I making choices that support and enable further evolutionary growth? But when we bring a deeper understanding of the first house, we have to appreciate that very, very often a part of this soul journey is creating a whole reality of separation. It's creating a whole experience where we are embellishing, we are deepening into the reality of separation, not in any kind of judgmental way. But we're just doing it to play out life experience, find ourselves along this journey, doing things. And while it is separation, meaning a separation simply means any desire for anything that manifests within time and space, right? We're moving somewhere. And yet that itself can be profoundly relevant and useful for furthering our own self-knowledge, our own self-awareness. And as we mature, we realize, okay, I don't have to be as defensive. I don't have to push as hard. We begin to become more appreciative, more aware of a greater evolutionary journey. So I feel like planets in the first house in general will often throughout a person's life represent this arc of self-knowledge that starts off pretty random, because it's like, here's a body, here's a mind, here's a bunch of energies, this feeling of wanting to do and go and become. You don't know what to do with it. So just figure it out. That's what happened. It's like, we have to become more soulfully self-aware. And as we learn and we become more mature in our own spirituality, our own sense of self, we'll use that first house energy more intelligently. But it does start off very random. It can feel very chaotic and random, where it's just that need to experience what it's like to have a hand, to have an arm, to have a will, to have a body, just to play it out. And ideally, there's a maturation that occurs over time. And that maturation really allows the soul to settle more fully in a state of fearlessness, where they know in every situation, I can draw upon my agency to make choices. And these choices will set me on the path that is relevant to where I'm fundamentally wanting to go. There's a need within the first house at a certain point to face that underlying anxiety, that sense of, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going, because fundamentally it comes back down to the good news or bad news, depending on how you think of it, that we can't take our personal will with us as its own separate entity. So there's a process that occurs along the soul journey, and I feel like it's very much a big egocentric adjustment in facing the confrontation, the limitations of just doing only what we want, and needing to come back into a deeper place of self-awareness, where our view of life is beyond, it's greater than just doing what we feel we need to do. Because that's not going to last very long. We're not going to sustain that forever. And that's why part of the first house expression will oftentimes throughout a person's life manifest as many different things happening. It's not necessarily about, this is your purpose in life, to do this one thing. Because purpose isn't of this world. Purpose isn't, you're here to do X, Y, and Z. No, you're here to experience that and to evolve via the experience of that. But that's going to come and it's going to go, right? All purposes, if we can say that individual actions or accomplishments exist as a purpose, it's temporary. And so the experience of doing something, doing the next thing is very, very common within the first house. And that's okay, because the higher purpose of it is the experience, is the moving through the personal will and ultimately the aligning of that with something greater than one's own making. So another thing that I want to say is, we often hear people speaking about, planets in the first house. You can really see it in their body. You can really see it in their face. You can they're very just descriptive of the personality. But why is that? Because it's how we're moving forward into life. It's somewhat superficial, right? It's not a deep statement of deeper soul purpose or deeper soul intention underneath the surface. It's very much how we are initiating life experience and moving forward moment to moment to moment. So we can think of the ascendant and the first house in general as how we are instinctively initiating experience to make life happen moment to moment. So yes, it is very much on the surface. It's very much how we're moving forward. And even if you have no planets there, your ascendant and whatever's happening energetically, whatever signs, the planetary ruler of your ascendant, the planetary ruler of whatever's in your first house, that's energetically speaking to how each soul is in relationship to the energy of initiation, and thus how we are each creating experience in life in order to become self-aware and initiate our soul's journey. The fact that the first house is opposite the seventh, we look into the relationship between the seventh house, which is relationship, right? Partnership, how we're harmonizing with other people, needing to cooperate, needing to get along with others, needing to understand that we all have needs, we can share needs with each other, we can communicate what we want, right? Seventh house with something that appears to be very, very solo. And I appreciate that in society, there's almost like a hyper glorification of the first house, seventh house archetype. There really is. We glorify relationship, partnership, seventh house. Someone's going to make me something more than what I am. And we also glorify this importance of the personal will, my personal purpose, right? Like, I need to be myself. I need my freedom to act. It's glorified in the sense that we really find these archetypes so glorified in the movies, in Hollywood, in the media, especially in the United States. It's like there's a hyper individuality and almost like a hyper fixation on relationship, right? I need to live my own life, make my own choices, do my own thing, and I'm really lonely. I need someone to complete me. We're obsessed with the relationship. We're obsessed with individuality. And to me, that just reflects where there is a learning to reorient these archetypes towards higher meaning. Like, what's the purpose of a relationship? What's the purpose of action? And whenever we look at anything in life stripped from greater meaning, stripped from a greater purpose, it becomes a glorification that really has nothing to it. It's just empty. So again, it's like that adrenaline, that movement. I'm awake, I'm alive, I'm free, I'm able to act. Great. I have the freedom to do what I want to do. Great. What's the purpose? And I think there is an important teaching here, and I'll share this chart here. What I'm just wanting to point out is the basic relationship between first house, eighth house, and sixth house. Just looking at this chart generically, these are the transits of the moment. Just the first house is archetypally in conjunct the sixth and archetypally in conjunct to the eighth. But there's something to acknowledge and appreciate about the first house. From the point of view of it's in conjunct with the eighth house, as I mentioned, the Scorpio Aries relationship, we think we're free. We think that the idealization here is this like archetype of freedom. I can do whatever I want. I can make whatever choices I want. Then we get into the eighth house realm and we realize, oh boy, I am not free. I am bound by unconscious psychological motivations that I cannot do more to free myself from. I have to actually face it. And the simple truth is, our idea of freedom, what we think we can do, right? The freedom of action, the range of choices that exists in our life is limited by our own internal psychology. In fact, we're going to perceive reality only in a way that is relevant to and reflects the reasons for our perceiving of it. Desire, the unconscious motivations that give rise to our life, what we're looking for outside of ourselves, that which we're seeking fulfillment, which we're ultimately seeking to play out and exhaust, determines perception. And what we perceive simply determines the field of choices in front of us. So we're going to be craving this freedom. I need to act, I need to do relative to the first house, but the eighth house in conjunct says, we're actually not very free. We need to play it out. We need to walk out our life experience. But really, everything that we're doing, it just is very fascinating and interesting way of realizing that our true freedom is in our true nature, but our lack of knowledge of that is linked to our desires. We're bound by our desires, and thus we're not free because we don't perceive what is. And thus our choices are very much limited by whatever we're internally bound by. It's just simply how it is. And so we meet it, we play it out, and we become self-aware. And then what happens as we evolve, the field of actions and choices that were otherwise very real for us are no longer relevant. They were relevant and we had to play them out. We had to experience them, and then they're not. We've moved on to a different stage of life experience. And a part of the egocentric adjustment that happens in that first house is really found to that sixth house in conjunct as well. Without that sixth house coming in there, we would act and we wouldn't bleed when we would hurt ourselves. We wouldn't create crisis and havoc when we make mistakes. We wouldn't ruin our lives and that of other people when we just act recklessly according to our own selfish desires. The sixth house brings us to yield into adjustments. It says you're going to act, and it's going to open up a playing field of choices and decisions and things to work on, things to develop. And when you look at the yod, the archetypal yod between the first, eighth, and sixth, or Aries, Scorpio, and Virgo, this yod says, first house, Aries, you have to do this. You gotta put your shoes on and you gotta walk. And it says, don't think that it's just about the thing you gotta do. It's more about showing up and taking the next step, sixth house, and then assessing what's really happening inside. What is it I'm trying to find? And if we don't have that psychological eighth house self-reflection, that first house ends up just being chaotic and frenzied, and it creates havoc in its walk. It says we need to be able to come back and look at ourselves, make adjustments, and really assess what's my purpose from an evolutionary perspective. What am I seeking to work through and realize? And the evolutionary journey at the core, all things can be boiled down to an elimination process. Like, we're not here to gain something, right? So it's all about elimination. That's really the relationship between the Neptune, Pisces, 12th, and the Scorpio. Right? What's fundamentally true is here, and then the Scorpio 8th house archetype points to the evolutionary journey is a matter of eliminating all desires, which keeps us bound in needing more experience to pursue what we believe is not yet here and awake within, right? So we're exhausting desire to arrive at what's always there when we're not clouded by the insistence for more. And I think what's really powerful, and what I love about Jeff Green's teachings and the EA paradigm, is the way that it points to choice. Right? When it comes down to it, the soul is fundamentally free. We are sovereign in our choice, and we're only as free as we're able to realize in the present moment. Meaning, we have to start with a content that's accessible now. Like, we start with where the light is, and we unravel that. We can't start with what's predominantly unconscious that we can't even become aware of. We're enslaved by unconsciousness, but what we are able to notice through the choice to look, to meet ourselves with total honesty, is where the unraveling begins. And that's why in that first house, if we're engaged with this evolutionary journey, our will is going to change a lot. What we want and what's important, what we need to do and what we need to act upon is going to express a certain fluidity. It's not going to stay the same. But we're also going to need to consistently engage with whatever the next step is, but we'll see where it goes. You know, very oftentimes we take the next step in life. We make the decision, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go here. And it doesn't take us where we thought it would. Simply because all we really needed to do was make for the next layer of self-knowledge. And this will often manifest as, okay, I didn't expect life to show up in this way. I'm confronted with a plethora of experiences. I now need to draw upon a deeper self-wisdom and self-knowledge to make a choice right now. And the analogy I often give is this idea of going out to battle. You know, you're attacked from the other team, or you come across a barricade or something happens you didn't expect, right, to see. The general needs to be able to make a momentary choice in that moment, and perhaps it's not what they expected they would do, right? That's why we can't be so fixed and hard on how we think it needs to go. As we evolve, there's a quality of confidence that we all develop along the soul journey. It's kind of holding a quality of vigilant and single focusedness on God, on evolution, which means we orient that first house energy toward, I need to use up this energy, this life force, this body, this blood that's running through me with choices and actions that will bring me as quickly as possible to who I am. Because we become aware of, wow, all this energy, I can do all kinds of things with this energy, right? I could use up my life force and just engage and do and do and do, but where is it really taking me? And even if we're not thinking about it in terms of awakening or spiritual evolution, there is a growth, as I was speaking, this maturation that happens for all souls within the first house, where over time, over the years, we really start to understand the importance of knowing our deeper commitments. And of course, this is a natural correspondence between the first house and the 10th house, just a square between the 10th house archetype and the first house archetype archetypally, right? We understand that the actions we're taking now are building a foundation that will actually manifest long-term experiences. So there's a maturation relative to the 10th house of becoming more self-responsible for how we're engaging in time and space. Realizing if I just act instinctively without consideration of consequence, I'm not going to build a path that resonates with my deepest commitments in life. And it's meaningful also to reflect on the square between the first house and the fourth house, because that points to that underlying anxiety. It's like the child that needs to separate from the womb or separate from parents, but wants to make sure mommy and daddy are still close by. It's threatening to the sense of self to walk out on life, to be in this field of open freedom, and to look back and not know where home is. To look back and say, where's my support? Am I cared for? Am I loved? So there's that tending to that delicate part of our own being, the ego construct, the part of our own being that actually can't force awakening. We can think of it like that. You know, if we've ever had any kind of experience, we can think of it as forcing awakening, or we can think of it as forcing ourselves towards anything. If we've ever had an experience where we've gone very deep, like off the deep end spiritually, or off the deep end, you know, in whatever area of life we want to think of it, where we're charged, we're in our freedom, we're making choices, we're accelerating, we feel that power. There often comes a point where there's a need to recuperate, right? It's like an athlete going really far, really hard, really long. They're going to manifest a period of time where they're going to need to just rest. See, it's a funny paradox. You can't rush evolution in the way that you can't work out so hard that you're going to become so strong and so resilient, right? It's like there's a degree to which you can't rush your evolution, and at the same time you can speed it up. So that seems like a paradox, right? It's like the moment we're in this illusory sense of control, I'm going to get here faster. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. That's where that fourth house square, and even the 10th house square, says, slow down, relax, you got to replenish, you got to nurture. You're actually hurting yourself. And it can really bring us back into this deeply vulnerable state, where it could even bring up that sense of, yeah, I'm not able to do it. I'm not strong enough. I can't go there. I tried, but I can't make it, right? Tried meditating 10 hours a day and I failed. So that doesn't work, right? That's that illusory, like, I'm going to be strong and heroic. But at the same time, what we are responsible for is intention, right? Our desire. What do we care most about? That point of intention, that point of desire, is a quiet but powerful program. It's a powerful foundation that really changes everything. It's more powerful than circumstance. It's something we can draw upon and rest upon anywhere, wherever we go, which will truly shift our relationship to whatever's present now. Right? That drawing upon that desire anywhere will then have the purpose of speeding up our evolutionary journey, because we're going to make choices and see things in different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look quick, or that it'll be quick in the way that we've otherwise thought of quickness. Like, I'm going to just drink a whole lot of medicine right now, and do a whole lot of yoga and just open my kundalini. That's the issue with going to it's the personal will becoming diluted with itself. So that sort of challenge with that first house sense of will, ultimately it's not about the will serving its own ends. That's why we have to orient this personal will towards something that is going to annihilate it, ultimately, something that's much greater than it. And I'll say too, there's a messiness in the first house, and we have to just accept that. It's messy because action is going to open up a field of experience that we couldn't have expected. By its very nature, like the Mars archetype, it's a circle and a cross coming out of the circle. It's the opposite of Venus. It's leaving that womb. It's leaving the circle wholeness. It's destabilizing. Adam Ginsburg has taught that about Mars, and I love that archetype, that teaching. Just looking at that archetype as inherently unbalancing by its very nature. So the point isn't like I'm going to act and then everything is figured out. I'm going to act, I'm going to learn, I'm going to do more action. This is true for all of us until we're no longer here anymore. And I find it really interesting that a lot of the deeper spiritual teachings in life are constantly orienting us to, again, all the good teachings to me feel they must be paradoxical, because it can't be something that is like nice and tidy and organized in the mind. It has to take us beyond this illusion of simplicity into something that the heart knows, something that's deeper, that we understand deep inside. A lot of the spiritual teachings I find will often speak to, you need not do anything. And how easily that can become confused, right? Like, you need not do anything. And then you can just find yourself being repressed, or feeling like you're not making choices, or you're just being carried along by other people's wills. But that teaching, you need not do anything, is almost serving to shift our reference away from the immediacy of I gotta do, I gotta act, I gotta do, and to support us to train our minds, to train our thinking. What is it like to do, to act right now with a quality of confidence and certainty, where the underlying motive for my actions isn't this anxiety to fix something? Like, what is it like to look at life where I'm not trying to defend, where I'm not trying to protect a perception of my own freedom being threatened? What is it like to act from a place of knowing that this action serves evolution? And that's true leadership. The leadership of the first house, where we can have confidence in ourselves, but be undefended. We'll find those teachings, you need not do anything, just as much as we'll find the teachings, it's all about your choice. It's all about you making the decision. Nothing's going to happen unless you make the decision for it. Both are beautifully true. But to see, it's like there's a way of thinking of action. There's a way of understanding the whole realm of choice that isn't rooted in the anxiousness to protect, defend, to get somewhere, to become, in a way of separation. So whatever's in the first house is going to speak to this natural path of cultivating our will and acting and moving through these journeys and these experiences and these lessons of orienting our will towards greater purpose. And where all these lessons are going to come through. Right? So if you have Virgo in the first house, naturally that's going to speak to a soul that might struggle with self-doubt, and thus might struggle with constructs of perfection. I don't want to act unless I can do it right. So there's a lot of attachment to outcome there. You want to have a certain freedom in the first house, not be so attached to outcome, but just to feel that you're moving forward on your soul journey. So what's the teaching with Virgo in the first house? The teaching would be, know your intention and do your best. Done. That's all. And then learn from that and keep on going. Right? Leo in the first house. Right? Leo in the first house, of course, the self-focus here is this calling for self-actualization. I have a purpose. There's something that I am to realize and become and awaken to. And so then the challenge there can be actions that are all oriented because I'm trying to orient to life from this place of specialness. Right? Well, so what would the purpose be here? To not be so concerned with outcome, right? But to open the heart, to connect with what is a purpose that wants to move through me, and to be courageous, to act, to do, to not be afraid to be seen. There can actually be a profound anxiety in Leo in the first house, where there's a constant awareness of, I exist. What am I going to do, right? But just to open up and not worry, open the heart and move. That's the teaching. So what I would love to do is actually just look at some charts. And I'm happy to look at charts of anyone who's present here. And we can just tune into what are the energies of the first house? And what are the lessons and the teachings in terms of choice and actions and independence and freedom and autonomy as it relates to the soul's evolutionary journey? And I'm happy to just take any questions that we could address. To ask any questions or offer your chart as an example.
You could use mine.
Okay, Jasmine. Sure.
Let me open my camera. Okay, so
give me your birth date and I'll plug it in.
Ari, you know that we have to anonymize birth data.
Oh yeah, good call. Maybe put it in the message, and then I can pull up your chart and cut out that part.
Cool.
Yeah. Did you put it in the chat box yet? There we go. Okay. Okay. Cancer rising? You're muted. Oh no, you don't have a Cancer rising. I got the time wrong.
Capricorn.
Yeah.
Rising.
Yep. Okay. Okay, I'm saving your chart so I can pull it up here. Okay. Not the best looking chart, but meaning not because of you, because of how I edited it, but it's something. So we got it now. Let's see if I can go full screen. Okay. That's the best as we're gonna get. Okay, wonderful. So we're looking at a Capricorn rising, 29 degrees, which brings a lot of emphasis on Saturn. So think about this, your rising sign on the most basic level is how we're instigating life experience. Look at the ruler of your rising, and that's going to give us more information for that. I don't agree with a lot of the astrological perspectives that make it a whole big deal. It's very apparent to our life in terms of how we're initiating life experience, and that's how we're orienting to this incarnation. So it's a big deal from that point of view, but it's not, I don't think of it as more important than any of the other rulers of any of the other angles, for example. Right? It's not more important than the ruler of the descendant or the midheaven or the IC. I think it's a part of this overly maybe masculine or yang focus on that ascendant masculine energy, doing, becoming. It is where there is a need to be able to make choices and cultivate a level of agency and autonomy in our life so that we can initiate and move forward along our soul journey. That is absolutely important. So we're going to look into the Saturn as a ruler of that ascendant, but then we see the bulk majority of your first house is Aquarius. It's actually entirely intercepted. And Venus is in Aquarius in the first house, and that itself is ruled by Uranus in Libra in the 9th. Okay, and they're trining each other as well. And then we also have a conjunction with Jupiter at the very end, practically in your second house as well. So there's a lot, obviously, that we can explore here. We're not going to go super deep, but let's look at some of the basics. Jasmine, what I would love for you, if you can just, if you're open to unmuting, just telling us a little bit about what you do. And I'll just speak here some of the pieces that I'm interested in. Clearly, with the Gemini Sag nodal axis and all that strong energy on the South Node in Gemini, there is, and then Mercury squaring the nodal axis, it definitely makes me interested in what your path is in regards to your own studies, your own path as a teacher, your own path as a writer, what kind of creative work you're doing, all that Gemini in the 5th. Clearly with all that on the South Node, this is an important area, and that the whole Mercury function is an important area in your soul journey. With Saturn ruling that, it makes me very curious to hear more about how that 5th house is manifesting for you. So tell us whatever you feel called to share, and then I'll take it from here.
Okay, so speaking of Mercury, so after raising my children, I went back to school 3 years ago, and I got a bachelor's to become a teacher, elementary school teacher. Now, while I was there, to be honest with you, it was very confusing to me. Although I loved the children, the students that I had, it just felt like it was a stepping stone. So then recently, I've taken that bachelor's and I've decided to go into acupuncture, the graduate school. And that for me feels more like in alignment with what it was that, whatever that end result is, but more on my path. Because while I was in school to become a elementary school teacher, although it felt very natural to be there, I was raised by a teacher. And it did, I have to say it was pretty easy to go into that. But like I said, once there, I questioned it almost every day and started looking into Oriental medicine while I was in my student teaching phase of that. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm to begin that next week. It's a 4-year journey.
Oh, cool.
Another going back to school, it's a 4-year journey for that. But in the end, it's a different environment. And I think it's a more, I think that environment is in tune with my habits, my hobbies, and etc.
Great. I have one question for you. What was the motivation for going to become an elementary school teacher? What was the drive? What's that feeling in you?
I think, honestly, it happened around the same year that just everything started blowing up in my life. So anything that I had judged all of a sudden came just full force at me. And I was faced with having to look into it. So growing up, I was against meditation, and I was against astrology, and I was against anything that I couldn't explain via religion, we'll say. And so that was in 2016 and into 2017, everything just turned upside down. And so it presented itself, the opportunity presented itself, and I thought, well, let me finish my bachelor's. And I thought to myself, there's got to be something that I can do with these children, but a fundamental something, not on the surface of academics. And when I was in the environment, I was not really allowed to do that. It was more about delivering the academics. So it was more trying to, I thought maybe, because what I noticed was that the children needed emotional support more than anything. And because the public school system is the way it's set up, it's very restrictive. So I couldn't really apply what I really felt like I could do in that environment.
That's great. Thank you for a couple of reflections on this. Really, just looking at your ascendant and your Saturn, it's really a strong example. So, just what's a Capricorn ascendant? A lot of us have Capricorn ascendants. Archetypally, what does that speak to? Okay, that's the soul that's going to naturally throughout their life become very time focused, time aware, and cultivating a compression of knowledge, of self-energy, self-knowledge, to direct one's will in ways that are fundamentally constructive and useful. And that sense of, what am I building long-term with my life? There can be a feeling of pressure, just as much as there can be a feeling of I'm left behind, I'm not actualized, because that Capricorn is a call to take responsibility for one's life and to do something relevant to one's deeper purpose here. And so it's very much about this journey of becoming knowledgeable of oneself. And the Capricorn journey is about self-authority, learning how to kind of access the authority within oneself. And that's a learning journey that can really only happen, especially if it's correspondent to the first house, over time, through trial and error. So there's a very strong implication here of you deepening and deepening and deepening in a knowing of freedom and will that's rooted in self-authority, that you're building a structural reality that reflects a level of agency and self-knowledge that really you've come to learn from within yourself, not defined by external authority, not defined by society. Now, Saturn ruling that, it's also in conjunct your ascendant. At the very end of Gemini, it's in a new phase to the South Node. At the same time, Mars is balsamic. So there's a lot of reworking how you do this Gemini in a fifth, which is a part of what you're saying. Is there's a sense of and you didn't say these words, but I'm going to speak these from what you've spoken and seeing this chart. There's a sense of, I have a purpose to structure an educational reality where I can teach and instruct and guide maybe children, fifth house, of course, long-term Saturn, in a way that is really useful and constructive, can guide them, that they can really grow into. And this feeling that there's something there for you is something you can't shake because of that South Node Saturn. There's like some piece that's being brought forward that really wants to be understood. And the ground of it is becoming your own authority, Saturn, in education. In, fifth house Gemini is how you creatively use your mind, sharing knowledge in creative ways, creative writing, constructing an educational experience in a way that is natural and genuine to your own soul being. There's a feeling of, I'm here to create something, put something together that I can teach, that I can share, that I can be generous with. I'm here to birth something with my own mind, and I have to work hard for it. Saturn, I have to know my purpose and work at it. So that experience of, I'm going into elementary education, and that's not it. That's someone else's idea. That's someone else's authority. It's this journey of like, well, what am I doing with this feeling, this knowing that I'm here to use my mind in creative ways, that I'm here to actually learn and construct and ground knowledge in ways that are constructive and useful that I could use for others. So just pointing out that there can be a profound sense of disrest relative to the feeling of not being creatively actualized. And that's where I feel the more you continue this path, the more you're going to be kind of gleaning this agency and this self-knowledge that I'm feeling you speaking to, and realize, oh, I can maybe create my own school. I can maybe write a book and teach these things that I'm learning to children, you know, Chinese medicine, astrology. And that's a part of that Saturn. You're actually here to be an authority. But it's like, until you realize this is you as the authority, not like doing what the world says, it won't be fulfilling. And that Sag in the 11th house, North Node, just to provide that perspective, is like, you need freedom. That's fun. You need to be authentic to yourself. And it doesn't feel good if you're just living in a linear mind, but you're not really enjoying it, right? It's like that Sag 11th house is also wanting you to free up and access a greater vision of spirituality that derives from a more scientific bird's eye view, to see things objectively, to study and be on a spiritual path of awakening from the seat of your essential nature. That's why the draw towards astrology and acupuncture resonates, in part because it speaks to seeing things objectively according to how it's created, the intelligence of creation. So I can see this journey with you working with these nodal polarities as a way to come back into that 5th house. And then relative to that Capricorn Ascendant, it's like, yes, I have a purpose here. I am starting this, and I'm just making up these words, so take none of these things literally, but it's very clear. It's like, you get to birth something. You get to create something that then allows you to educate and teach or share, or publishing books, you know? Would you like to speak to any of those things that I just said?
That's exactly how I felt while I was in the classroom. I felt this, although I could deliver the academics, and it would, you know, they would give me something and this is what you're going to teach, but it felt so restricting and so confining that I would go home and I would say, what is this for? This doesn't feel like, this is not what I had in mind. Like you say, this is not what I had in mind. I thought that once I had a classroom that I was going to be able to just expand their minds, just completely just give them the opportunity to just be who they are, and not with the setup that I was in. It wasn't going to happen because of standards and because of just expectations. But you know, that you have the district and you have the government and you have so much on top of you that there's very little room. Anyway, I didn't have much room for creativity. And so then that's when I started just, I mean, it caused me a lot of stress. It did cause me a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, because it felt like, I know I'm supposed to be doing something maybe with children at some point. Whatever I couldn't do in the classroom, I did with my own children. So they're very versed in energy and astrology and, you know, so I did have that avenue to take to satisfy that. But in the end, it's still always trying to get to the bottom of things and helping and educating the children and those that are connected with, you know, to the children, the parents and etc., about themselves, you know, but the deeper meaning of themselves, not so much the superficial academics.
Yeah. And I can see how over time, as you walk this path of really being in your freedom, there is that sense of, okay, I can use the structures of time, the structures of society and all these things to build something, but under a deeper sense of agency and purpose, and not just fitting into some world that someone else created. But I am working in the world. That's where you get to actually do all this work. But it's like, I love what you just shared, is sharing all this stuff with your children. I can feel the evolution of that in terms of like what you're creating from the inside out. And I just want to point out one other piece. So the bulk of your 1st house being Aquarius is intercepted. It's ruled by Uranus, which actually shares a grand trine with Saturn and Venus, all in fire houses, right? Air signs, fire houses. So this fundamentally speaks to a big part of this 1st house orientation for you, with all that Aquarius and that Uranus in 9th, is overcoming the underlying psychological alienation. I'm an outsider. I fundamentally don't agree with Uranus in 9th. I see things differently. I have a different perspective and view. And so I'm needing to free myself from the need to compare myself or be liked or fit in, a Libra, a 9th house, and actually face that Venus and Aquarius in the first house, which is fundamentally I'm valuing myself from within, depending on my own self-value, even if it looks like nothing else that anyone else is doing. I need to engage that first house quality of walking the solo path, but here in an Aquarian Venus way, I have to trust my own values and be okay with there being no comparison. An Aquarian Uranian thing is very much, there's no precedent for what we're doing because it's arising from a liberated mind. So you free yourself from precedent, from the known, from constructs of the past. And you just have the freedom to trust yourself and know that you're secure Venus. You have what you need to walk forward and walk your own path and to beat to the beat of your own drum, like to dance to the beat of your own drum, to example, that's a very wonderful demonstration where you see a lot of the qualifications aren't about the planets in the first house by themselves. You look at the rulers of all this first house, the Saturn and the Uranus, they're trining each other, 5th house, 9th house, right? Education, children, creative purpose. So much of this energy is about defining this purpose from within yourself and walking the path that really comes from this self-knowledge. By the way, without that self-knowledge, these signs would point to depression, right? Saturn, I have the job, Saturn, I'm teaching kids, Gemini in the 5th, but I'm not happy. Trining Uranus, maybe I can rationalize, I can teach in my own way, I can do my own thing, you know, support their individuality, but I'm fitting myself into a box. And this trine, a part of what it says is to apply your intelligence and thoughtfulness to work within structures of society, but in a way where you're not trying to fit your individuality into a box. Like really make this work for you. Really have that thoughtfulness and that intelligence so that you can fundamentally know that you're free to live your life, to be yourself. There are a lot of signatures in this chart that speak to that need for freedom. So
That's awesome.
yeah, thank you. Thank you for offering yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's wonderful.
And okay, well, we should bring this class to a close now, but I'll just open up. If anyone has any other questions or just want to speak to anything before we close, we can do that. Anyone want to ask any questions? Great. Okay, thank you everyone for joining me in this class. This is the first class in several months since Linda's passing. So it's really a joy to get to be here with you all. And thank you so much for Sue and Robin for holding this space down, for everyone who's just sort of stepped up to allow for the continuity of these classes. I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
And
All right,
thank
much
you
love
for
to
your
everyone.
thank you for your brilliance, Ari. Another awesome meeting.
Great. All right,
Yes.
bye, my
Thank you,
friends.
Ari.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.